everybody. I'm freaking out our guest already. Hi, everybody. How are you doing? Ben, nice to see you here. I see a bunch of the regulars in the audience. This is a fun one. I have not met Lou in person before. I've read their work on and off. I played it at Gen Con out of just happenstance. Someone was running it for me. And today we get to sit down and actually talk about all things that are thrown in bones and Lazy Wolf Studios. But before that, we got to touch a little base. We have some news we have to go over, everybody. So let's just do this now so we can get into the interview. We're going to be doing our news, Kickstarter, Lou. The AMA is now out on YouTube. So if you are looking to watch the AMA that we had this weekend, actually on Friday, it is done and out. It has got chapters on it. I tried to hit all the questions, but there were so many. Some may have got missed in the wash there. And then, of course, you can always join our Discord for things that we have going on if you want to know more about Tales of the Valiant or find people to play test the preview with. So let's first look, I guess, at the Kickstarter and talk about what's been going on. Y'all, it has been a wild almost 8 days for us with the Kickstarter. We broke 800. We have a ton of stretch goals that have been unlocked. The preview is available for anyone who hasn't downloaded it. And we even put out a character sheet that's form-filled because we know everyone was asking for it. Like, how are we going to play test this without a character sheet? Well, happy to say you can get the character sheet now. If you want it in your Kobold Press library, you can get it there. If you want it in your drive-through library, you can get it there. It's free. It's form-fillable. It's kind of like our preview version of the character sheet for now. I would like to point out, for me, there's 2 spots for armor class, which makes me super happy. We've hit so many stretch goals. I want to know if they put up the new one. I woke up today and took a shower and ate some breakfast and prepped for this. And we did. We put it out. So here's our latest 2 pieces that have come out for our stretch goals. 700K, the Fortress of Dib, the return, if you remember Dib. That's coming back for levels 1 and 2. And 800K we just did. Y'all, we're getting the Witch and Bard playtest. I expect Celeste to make the best witch ever because it's in her last name. If it is not the best witch ever, Celeste, I'm going to click this as a vertical, and I'm going to send it to you. I demand the best witch ever. So that's coming out. I'm actually a big Bard fan, so I'm excited that we're doing a Bard. And then, obviously, our 900K is Troubles and Mossbeard. That's going to be a level 2 to 3 adventure. And then, I hope when we hit our 900, we put out our mill goal, because our mill goal I haven't seen yet. I've seen all these. I just haven't seen our mill goal. There are some updates that have come out as well. We have been doing as many updates as we can. You can take a look at the cover art and wallpapers that are out, a design diary, and the Discord for AMA. That is all in your updates right now. So that's enough about us. That's my news this week. You missed Kobold Chronicles this weekend too, but don't worry. Last Sunday of next month, we'll have another Chronicles on our Discord. And that means I think it's time to talk to our guest today. Lou, you ready? All right. Lou, you have been around the block for a while, bud, and I don't mean just in tabletop RPGs. You have been, well, as I learned, on the TV screen a couple times in your life, and you worked in a lot of sci-fi nostalgia, I think, for a lot of people here in the audience, from Star Trek to Babylon. Look, man, that is a journey. You went down a creator's journey. And I want to kind of start with, I guess, the beginning before we get into Throne and Bones, because I know it's your baby right now. But you worked as a writer, or you worked as like an interviewer for Star Trek and DS9 and Babylon 5. Like, how did you land that?
How I landed it was kind of a story, but I was a journalist.
That's what we're here for, is stories.
Oh, well, in 95, I moved to Los Angeles after a couple years in theater in Chicago.
Okay. And
for 6-8 months, I was just a PA on infomercials and rock music videos. I stood on top of a 3-story building and dumped fake money on a young rap band once.
That sounds like fun.
And it was, until I had to pick all the fake money up and sort it back.
That is not fun.
The guy ahead above me thought it would look better if it was in different denominations, and the money rental company wanted it back in those denominations.
Stacks.
So we stayed up all night long sorting it. But the jobs ran out, the money ran out. My father called me and said, "You're not too old to go to law school. I will fly you home if you will go to law school." I went for a 3-hour jog, during which I debated options. I knew a guy at Capitol Records. I think he was the dude who discovered the Foo Fighters.
Okay, well that's a big discovery.
And I knew some people that wrote Doctor Who books.
Oh, okay.
And I thought, I was an English major. I had no interest in journalism whatsoever, but I did not want to go become a lawyer. So I said, I'm gonna flip a coin between rock journalism and science fiction and fantasy journalism. And I literally flipped the coin, and science fiction journalism won. And I wrote.
That's
I went
amazing.
to the store. I wasn't like even that involved. I went to the drugstore and bought every science fiction magazine. And
I mean, that's how you did
all.
research back then. It was magazines. Yeah. I worked at Walden Books, so.
And I wrote them all and was like, I'd love to write an article about Doctor Who books for you guys.
Yeah.
And Sci-Fi Universe, which was the only non-porn magazine owned by Larry Flint at the time, wrote me back and said, we don't care about Doctor Who books, but we've been invited to this Doctor Who convention in Irvine, California, and if you want to cover it for us, because we don't want to go, you can do that. And this was when the 1996 Fox, BBC, Paul McGann Doctor Who was happening.
Oh.
So I went out there and I met, I hung out all weekend long, and I did tons of interviews, and I put way too much work into this 500-word article that needed to be done. And when I was there, I met this guy named Jean-Marc Leffissier, who was the fan liaison between the Doctor Who fans and Peter Siegel until they had a fallout.
Sure, the middleman.
Yeah. And a week later, he called me and said that Titan Books in London was starting a Star Trek magazine, and they needed somebody to be their Los Angeles guy, and he didn't want to do it. He recommended me. And I had not.
So maybe those hours weren't for waste.
Yeah, but I had no credits or anything, and they took me out to breakfast, and I brought my dot matrix printed article that hadn't been published yet.
Man.
And I sat across from the owners, and they were asking me all these questions about Star Trek, which I just kind of watched, with half an eye. And they're like,
"Gotta be careful that half an eye watch for Star Trek."
What do you think about this? What do you think about that? And I answered every question. You will never find in all of Los Angeles a better Star Trek journalist than me. And they'd say, okay, but what do you think about blah, blah, blah? And I said, doesn't matter. You will never find in all of Los Angeles a better Star Trek journalist than me. And I repeated that for an hour. And that was my only response for an hour.
Yeah.
And I got the job.
Wait a minute, did you Kaiser Sose these people?
Yes. But I made it true, because I spent 5 years on the set of Star Trek and then later on Babylon 5.
Yeah.
And I wrote over 500 articles, interviews with the cast. There was an amazing time when we got to do a piece that was following one show from concept to post-production.
Sure.
Through every single department. And it was a phenomenal experience. And by the end of it, one producer said I was his favorite journalist covering his show, and the producer of the other, I won't say who is who, the producer of the other show briefly tried to entertain the idea that aside from places like Entertainment Weekly, they would bar all magazines from the set but me, and let me write for all magazines. And I'm like, that doesn't work. That's not how it works, but thank you. So I made it true. But it was not true in 1996.
So with that being the thing said, you got to interview people, and for me working in art, doing photorealistic calendars and shoots like that, we talked a little bit before, but I didn't ask you this. How fun is it to interview people who are doing makeup that can't move for 2 to 3 hours?
It actually, the makeup trailer was a good place to do an interview. That was never anything but pleasant.
Right.
I did interview Martin Sheen in the makeup trailer.
What was he playing?
He was in River of Souls.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and he was hysterical. He I don't remember exactly how he phrased it, but he told me about how he hated science fiction and fantasy.
Oh, really?
He goes, no interest in it. I think it's ridiculous, but I'm fascinated by it. But I don't like it at all.
That's priceless.
And then while we were there, he gets a phone call because Charlie's in trouble again. And so it was I got the full Martin Sheen experience.
I mean, that right there sounds 100% correct. And his kid's in trouble again. So you get to do all this awesome journalistic stuff. Obviously, you were a writer, at least at heart, even if you didn't, know at the time. When did what you're doing now come around? Like, you did novels and you've done a tabletop game. Like, which came first, chicken or the egg kind of thing? Like, Thrown in Bones.
When I was in LA, I was writing scripts with a partner, and we had stuff optioned but not produced, which means we got paid a little bit of money for the idea, but we would get a lot of money if they made it into a movie, and they did not.
That's how it always goes.
And then I got hired by an ex-girlfriend to go up to San Francisco and participate in the .com industry in 2000 in a thing that was it was a company called Bookface, because we had the two words backwards, or we would have been huge. And it was an online reading experience. And so
that's a kick in the pants.
They sent me around to science fiction conventions to get people to sign up.
Oh, okay.
And I did that for a year. And when it collapsed with the .com bubble, I knew everybody in science fiction fantasy.
Yeah, because you've been working it.
Yep. So I started freelancing as an editor of anthologies, and then I got another job that fell out in my lap out of the blue to create a science fiction fantasy imprint called Pyre Books.
Oh, okay.
And I ran that from 2005 to 2014. I was the if you know Joe Abercrombie, I was his first U.S. editor. I brought him across.
Gotcha.
And then around that time, I started writing, and because all my friends then were adult science fiction fantasy writers, I was terrified to write an adult book because they might read it and have bad things to say about it.
This is true.
So I started writing children's books. I had 2 young kids at the time, and
well, that's a changeover. You went from adult science fiction to the only magazine owned by someone who did adult content, like actual adult content, to working in the .com industry, to, you know what, these people are scary, let me write for children. I hate to tell you this, Lou, children are scarier than adults.
Oh, they are, and they pay more attention.
Yes. But, did you learn that the hard way?
Oh, yes.
So Thrown in Bones comes around then, what, 2013, 2014?
So I started working on it in 2012, and it comes out in 2014, the first novel, Frostborn.
Okay.
And and in my ignorance, when I started working on it, I thought I will pick a tiny snowbound land, and because I don't even know if I can write fantasy, right? This is my first attempt, and I'll just stay in this one little corner of the world, and if it works, I'll expand from there.
Okay.
And so then I didn't actually know that much about Norse culture at the time. I think I had I think everything I knew about Norse culture was summed up in that drawing of Thor hitting the world serpent with a hammer and demigods, demigods and heroes.
I think that's how most of us learned about that culture back in the day. Yeah,
I love that picture, man. But so I started researching the Vikings and the Scandinavian culture, and of course that became a huge deep dive. And it ended up, before I'd ever started writing the book, I had already produced about 40,000 words of setting material, because every time they invaded England or went to North America or whatever, I needed to know what my people were doing at that same time
to make kind of a parallel to the history.
Yeah. And I think it was around that time that I returned to. I wasn't playing them again, but I picked up the Galorian and Midgard setting guides.
Sure.
And I started to get the idea that I was building a setting guide, in the background while I was working on this novel.
So how long did it take for the novel then before you went to TTRPG?
Well, for the second novel, I actually ran that for my kids and their friends as a Fate game.
Oh, wow!
Tied into what I was building in the novel.
It's a great learning system.
And I've taught writing courses using Fate. Every writer should play Fate at least once. It's a brilliant system for getting how cinematic action happens.
Sure, what the point of it is. That's for sure.
Absolutely. But as they got a little older, I got sick of them saying, how many gold pieces do we get for this? How many? And I'm like, well, it doesn't really matter, and you got a lot. I don't know, you got a bunch.
But eventually,
and they wanted to play something crunchier. So
yeah. I think every person's TTRPG career I shouldn't say career, journey goes from like, I want no crunch to I want all the crunch to I want no crunch. Like it just does this. It's just a roller coaster ride. So how long was the novel out then?
There's the first novel had, let's see, there's 3 novels in the trilogy, and then
Yep.
there's a 4th standalone book that's pitched a little younger, and then I wrote a Star Wars book in that too. But while that's happening, I start playing Dungeons and Dragons, and
Like the rest of us.
very hard. We started with Lost Mines of Fandever, and then when one kid couldn't play, we did Cat and Mouse, Richard Pett's brilliant Kobold Press thing, and that's when I fell in love with Midgard. And it was in that time. It's impossible for me to just be a passive bystander in something.
Yeah,
So,
I can't do that either. I don't think any hyper creative can.
So I was playtesting Tales of the Old Margreave for Matt Corley.
Okay.
And can I spoil things?
I mean, that's on you.
Well, I mean, it's been out for several years, and everyone's.
Oh, you mean that kind of spoiler? Look, if you
yeah.
haven't read it or done it by now, don't worry. You can still go do it.
So in that you've got that little girl who's the prisoner of she's in a 50-year coma with the bee queen, and she's laying down on a slab of honey in a giant beehive, and she's in a coma, and her spirit's going out to the world. And you're supposed to rescue her, but you don't really want to kill the bee queen because she's kind of important to the balance of the Margreave, and so you really need to negotiate with the bee queen.
Yep.
And one of my players, actually played by my nephew Jonathan Anders, and more about him later, he's like, well, I offer myself. And I'm like, you what?
Yeah.
And he says, yeah, I'm a Minotaur priest of Hecate. I'm way more interesting than a 6-year-old girl. I offer myself in trade. And the girl wakes up, and he lays down on the table and goes into a coma, and the rest of the players look at each other and go, did Jonathan just leave the campaign? And so I had to figure out a way to keep him in the game.
Yeah.
So I called up Matt Corley, and I said, what if we have a warlock patron that is the Margreave? And then he can awaken from his coma and be sent on Margreave missions.
Sure.
And we pitched it to Wolfgang, and that ended up in the Player's Guide to the Margreave.
Oh, that's a nice little tidbit of history, man.
So that was my first design work for them.
I didn't know that. That's news to me.
Yep. I wrote the short story that starts out in the start of the Player's Guide to the Margreave too.
Oh, okay.
But around that time, my daughter and I started playing the Tales of Equestria RPG, the My Little Pony RPG.
Oh,
and I
okay.
started tweeting about how fun that is, and Riverhorse contacted me and asked me to write for that. And I told him only if my daughter can do it with me.
Aw.
And so we co-wrote, and she was like 11 at the time, and I thought she'd give me a couple ideas and I would write the adventure. No, she pushed me off my keyboard, said leave me alone, and she typed out the whole thing. Are you serious? I don't think Riverhorse needs to know how much of it is her, but and then when they sent us the check and she's like, what are we gonna do with that? I said, we're gonna split it 50-50, and she goes, 50-50? I practically wrote the whole thing.
How old was she when this happened?
She was 11, 12, something like that.
You think maybe she learned from an adult in the household, and maybe just a little bit?
But she's for years after that, I'd be working on something, and she's like, why are you still writing that? It takes you forever. But
you're like, you want to write it all?
But she had a publishing credit.
Oh, that's awesome.
It's co-credit because it was a co-effort.
That's crazy.
And so then I did a lot more work for Kobold, and I love Midgard. Midgard is my favorite setting in the world, and then the pandemic happened, and March 2000, slightly sad note, my father died. I was working on what was going to be my first adult novel, and it just stopped. And I thought, I need a change of pace. I'll take 1 month, and I'll write this little 30-page supplement.
You got the itch.
Yeah, it's that 30-page
you got
supplement.
The itch.
How many pages is it now? It was like 300 and... No, it's...
He's like, let me keep flipping.
220 pages.
That's an endeavor. The first time you publish a TTRPG, it is a different job.
All the words in this are mine except for the ball game Knatliker.
Okay.
Because Brian Susskind, who wrote an adventure in the companion book, didn't like my rules for Cadet Liker, and I didn't like his, and so we passed it back and forth until we could agree. So he's the only other writer credited in that. But that was my 2020, and it just kept growing and growing and growing.
Well, so I have it on right now, the campaign setting on screen for people to see. The first thing, we know 50% of it was written by your daughter.
No. I can't even get her to play it.
Was it a different endeavor? I mean, you obviously have been tabletopping for a while. Like, it sounds, I mean, I can look behind you. You got full castle pieces and unopened boxes of miniatures and tons of stuff behind you, like every good nerd does. Oh yeah, everywhere. Look at you. Yeah. You got a full basement full of miniatures. Is that some K9 foam I see? Is that what that is?
Oh yeah, that's the cubicle.
Cubicle. Okay, it's one or the other. Yep. I am familiar. Oh yeah, you got all of it. Yep. You're sitting at the table you game at.
Yeah. Too noisy upstairs.
Now you just got to get yourself centered again.
Sorry about that.
Just aim the camera back a little bit and you'll be fine.
I'm sitting at a Carolina Game Tables Tablezilla.
Oh yeah, they make great stuff.
Oh, I love it. They're the only table that gives you enough lip to put the books on.
My argument is books should be landscape for a long time now for tabletop gaming. Because of that exact reason. So, Throne and Bones is a big book. 232, a lot of stuff in here. A lot of amazing artists, writers, creators that are involved in this. How did you start hunting down all the people to help you produce this thing? Because this is a big book for like this is your first endeavor for making your own product. How did you find all these people?
Well, for the companion book,
I have that open as well.
Called Forensic Kobold Press. So,
okay.
Suskin, Ben McFarland, Sarah Madsen, Jeff Lee all wrote stories for that, adventures for that. And then art-wise, I was an art director for 10 years during that publishing time.
Yeah, you do everything. You wear multiple hats doing that job.
Yeah. So well, that was self-defense. I actually wasn't supposed to be the art director. The company had an art director.
Oh, okay.
They worked on non-fiction titles, and we got our first fiction book in. And they didn't know anything about science fiction and fantasy, so they were picking fonts with names like Futura and Sci-Fi.
Those are not.
I took over the art directing in self-defense.
Long as you don't use Sanskrit, you're already one step ahead.
Trajan, baby. But so I came at this already with 10 years experience as an AD.
Oh, nice. So you had contacts already, people you could get a hold of.
I love the art styles in Midgard. I love the art styles in Paizo, and I work with a lot of the same artists. And I joke too that these books are really they're really art books disguised as RPG manuals. They're packed full of art.
That was the first thing I was gonna say is your art to page ratio is ridiculous. There is so much art in these books. Like, I'm scrolling through it on screen right now. If you all haven't picked these up, you can find them on DriveThruRPG. Are they on your website as well, or just DriveThru?
Just DriveThru right now.
So on DriveThruRPG, anything under Lazy Wolf Studios, you can find them. Yep. There is so much art here, and they started as kids' books. So I guess my next question to you is, most RPG players aren't kids.
The games are not for kids. The game's not for kids. I mean, you could take your child, if your child read my children's books and wanted to play in the world, you could do it. You'd have to take out some things.
So how did you transition from a child's book to Viking? Is it all that original research that you shaved all the adultness off of?
Yeah, I mean, I think from the get-go, I wanted to build a world that was big enough to contain many types of stories. Star Wars does something really well, which is that they segment their audience. So you've got Star Wars picture books for little bitty kids, and you've got Star Wars children's books like the one I wrote, and you've got Star Wars adult novels, and you can have everything from like the mighty Chewbacca on the Planet of Fear and Andor. They're completely different, but they're both scoops out of that same universe, and that's the philosophy I've always had with this.
Well, we know when he wrote all this stuff, no species that we see in Star Wars does what their species does. Wookiees aren't technicians, but here we go. Jar Jar Binks, everyone's a warrior, not that guy. So he liked to flip the script on everything he did, and splitting it up. That was one of the smart things they did, and it's kind of continued on. So doing this more adult TTRPG, You've done some Kickstarters. You have 3 books out in the Throne and Bones right now, and then you have a 4th book I saw on your site as well. You have your core book out right now for the world itself, like the campaign setting. You have a series of adventures for people to learn the set piece, which is all the names you put earlier, which is Lee, Madsen, McFarlane, Susskind, all that kind of stuff. Which, by the way, the cover art for that looks like epic combat.
Well, that's William O'Brien. You know him from the Black Flag picture.
Right. Oh, and I'm aware. It's the Man of War, baby.
Yeah. He's amazing.
So, do you, when you're playing in this set piece, what is it exactly? Like, besides being Viking, you've obviously redressed the idea of Norse mythology and the setting of, Scandinavians into something fantasy. It is a fantasy set piece. What makes it different than the history that we know?
Well, all right. So first of all, it's a different world. World's name is Qualth, and that comes from the slang for the 5th cardinal direction. You got north, south, east, west, and Qualth is the distance on the map toward the viewer.
Oh, okay.
Because fantasy worlds don't exist if no one's looking.
It's true.
And so that's the name of the world.
That's smart.
And then the section we've started in is only in the first novel. It's Norengard, or more properly, Norengard. And that it's the far northwest corner of the continent of Catarnia, but the books actually travel across 2,000 miles across the 3 books.
Oh, really?
And then the standalone novel is set in a Celtic setting that's different too. So it's only the first novel that's Norse. And, and so for the games, I started there. We're getting ahead of ourselves, but I'm moving away from that now into some of the other areas.
We'll get to that next for you.
Yeah, but we'll get in that next. But to talk about the Norse setting, it's a little different in that my world is definitely in their High Middle Ages period.
Okay.
It's actually a pretty crowded place in the main continent, and the difference between Norengard and Scandinavia is that they, unlike in the 1400s, Scandinavia had begun to be Christianized.
Mm-hmm.
My Norengard resisted the encroachment of the big empire that was knocking on their doorstep, thanks to a dragon, and didn't want anybody coming near, and so they've kept their culture. They've kept their culture, and they stopped raiding 100 years ago, and the king is very happy now to take the guild payment for them to stop raiding, and not everybody's happy with that. Some the more southern cities are starting to open up markets to the rest of the world and realize that commerce could be fun. I mean, big commerce. The Vikings always did commerce, and but some of the more northern places are like, we kind of miss raiding, and one city has started back raiding, and everyone's turning a blind eye right now because they don't want the guild payments to stop. And
boy, that sounds familiar.
So it's a little bit past that, and they're still living in longhouses and wattle and daub shacks, but they're still sleeping on benches, but they're starting to open up to the world.
Okay.
And for the book, I had only worked out one city, the city of Binsa, which is modeled on the city of Burka. Not Burka, that's How to Train Your Dragon. It is. Burka is How to Train Your Dragon. That's right, we both modeled on the same thing. Burka is the real city. Burka is How to Train Your Dragon. Binsa is me. And for the game, I realized I can't get by with one city. So I had to come up, I'd mentioned some of the other cities. There were already places on a map with nothing there. And so I had to come up with 9 other cities for the game.
Yeah, macro view, micro development out.
Yep.
Yeah, 100%.
And so there's a lot of stuff like that. And
so you, obviously, you're a fan of cartography then, and we're going to get into you moving into some other areas within the world of Throne and Bones. And I pulled up the map pack here. I know they're going to be in the opposite direction for the audience, but Rob is one of my favorite artists for cartography. As a cartographer and someone who's been doing it for a long time, like I did real world and I've done a lot of fantasy stuff. His stuff is just always stunning. He's got his own artist mark in the way that things look. And this guy cranked out. I mean, there's just 13 in this map pack full of stuff. Do maps to you, environmental stuff and maps in general, are they more of a story builder than like character art for you? Like locations and landscapes. Is that more important to you for running an adventure and writing a novel?
Maps are, well, I mean, it's interesting because when I teach writing, I tell people that maps are not character, that maps are background.
Okay.
That character is someone who wants and can't have. And that's what all stories start as. And it's not a story until you have a person with a drive, something they need desperately and are denied, or think they need. But at the same time, when Robert Lazzaretti, Laz and I go way back. It was during the first novel that I first got in touch with him.
Okay.
When I was an editor, we would produce maps for our fantasy writers, and then I had one writer named Erin Hoffman, and she said, "Lou, I'm gonna have the map ready for you in a few weeks." I said, "What do you mean you're gonna have the map ready? We'll make your map." And she goes, "No, I'm making the map. I don't want y'all getting it wrong. I'm making the map." And I felt super guilty because, you know, we were cheap. We weren't that cheap. We would have paid for a map. And then when I sold my novel, I was like, "Oh my God, Erin's a genius. I'm getting them a map before they screw this up."
It makes a big difference. It's huge.
So I cold called Lazzaretti and asked him to make my map, and I got to go to Norway after the book was sold, before the book came out, and he was still working on the map, and I was taking photo references and sending it to him. I was going back I was on a cruise ship. I was going back at night and emailing Laz the photos, and the next morning I would wake up and get the adjusted map based on the photos.
Yeah.
It was a blast.
That's actually a really cool creative process.
So I started mapping as I write back then, and I realized and it was interesting because, you know, Laz would like it. There's in the second book, I changed something because I had a character cross a Constantinople-sized city in 5 minutes, and when I saw Laz's map, I said that can't happen.
It's impossible.
And I rewrote the story based on the map. And also sometimes Laz he'll do something, and I'll be like, no, I mean for you to do it this way, and he'll come back and he still hasn't gotten it. He's still doing it this way, and I'm like, no, I mean for it to be this way. And after like 3 times trying to get him to do what I'm talking about, I'm just like, you know what, screw it.
It's easier to rewrite it.
He's that's what it looks like. That's what I'm going to write for now.
It's true. It's true. Yep. Oh, man.
But we've done a lot of maps that haven't been seen yet. Again, I knew I was building something. I've got all these city maps that no one's seen, and
his city maps are gorgeous.
Yeah, phenomenal.
Some of my favorite pieces.
I can't wait to get to them.
So I guess that brings us to now. You have a Kickstarter going on for a series of stories, correct? Like collection of short stories from writers. It's going right now. What made you decide to go back and do another novel? Was it because of the 5e thing where you're like, I got to fill the gap while we find out what's going on?
Well, there's 2 things, and we skipped one thing I want to talk about briefly.
Oh, yeah. Go ahead.
We came out earlier this year with Vengeance of the Valravn, which is the darkest thing I've ever done, talking about the contrast between
I don't think I have that downloaded.
Children book and this. Oh, I need to send it to you. It's the Valravn monster, and is not Norse myth. It's later Scandinavian myth, and it's from the 1800s. It's totally someone in the 1800s trying to write Viking, but when a chieftain or a jarl, in my case, is left in the woods and not buried when they're dead, and a raven eats their heart, they morph into this wolf raven thing called a Valraven. And if that can eat a child's heart, it becomes humanoid.
Oh, so it's got a little bit of the Barghest kind of feel to it.
Yeah. And so Vengeance of the Valravn is a story about that, and I think it's the best thing I've ever done. It does have a happy ending as long as you survive. I made my players cry, which I've never done before.
That's satisfying, and not a negative way, but like I did something to cause emotion.
There's a real story in Scottish or English history that it's about an Irish wolf. It must be Irish, an Irish wolfhound and a wolf. But I turned that into an actual wolf and a Valravn. But in my version of the story, there's this jarl who has a wolf, and when he becomes jarl, everyone's like, "You gotta get rid of that wolf." And he's like, "No, I'm not getting rid of the wolf. I love the wolf."
Yeah.
And then he gets married and has a kid, and they're all like, "You shouldn't have a wolf in the house." And he comes home one day, and there's blood on his child's bedclothes, and the wolf's face is bloody.
Yep.
And he takes out his axe, and he chops its head in 2. And then he walks around behind the bed and finds a dead Valraven.
Yeah.
He realizes he's just murdered his best friend, who just saved his child's life.
I know that tale.
And it was a wolfhound, and the man never smiled again. He built a huge statue of the dog, and he never smiled again.
If you saw my dog right now, if she came up here, she is that dog.
Oh, wow.
She looks just like it.
My 2 golden doodles are sacked out on the couch over there.
Oh, she'll make an appearance. She always does.
So that's the backstory.
That's
And-
awesome.
And the ghost of the Valravan that was killed 600 years ago has come back.
So, what made you, I guess before we go into the new novels
Yeah.
and the short stories, what made you write this piece? Was this to really kind of cement the adultness of...
No, I didn't want it to be so dark to begin with. I started feeling guilty about how wolves are low-level baddies in video games and tabletop role-playing.
And they're not.
You know, and they're not.
Yeah.
They're vital to the environment. They're really sweet. You know, they're just big doggies, and not that I'm advocating petting them, and
Only under special
I
supervision.
wanted to do something wolf positive, and then I was like, if it's wolf positive,
Is that a
then
term?
it is now. And I was like, if it's gonna be wolf positive, then who are the bad guys? And I realized, these corrupted ravens that are trying to take
Yeah.
wolf shape are the bad guys. And
Yeah.
so then from there, and then like they kill kids, so then Myling come in. The Myling are the ghost of children. And, you know, the whole thing just starts sprouting. I'm like, oh my god, this is really dark.
Like, I fell down a deep well.
Yeah. But it's all just pulled right out of Scandinavian storytelling.
Yeah,
And
I mean,
I
their
think it's one of the-
lore is dark in general.
Yeah. And I mean, it has it's the only thing I've got with a content warning on it. But I think it's the best story. And then I got, so you're asking about the short story. Last year I got hired by Meta
Okay.
to work on something I probably can't talk about, although it's not happening. And I spent a year working harder than I've worked since the .com days.
Oh, really?
So I had gotten halfway through Vengeance of the Valravan when this happened. So I hired Kelly Pollock from Kobold Press to help me finish it. And at the same time, I had always wanted to do a short story anthology of other people writing in my worlds. I actually tried to build that into my first book contract, and both my agent and my publisher were like, "Why the hell would you do that?" But it's something I've always wanted to do.
Okay.
And so while I was working for Meta and I was too busy to work on my own stuff, I greenlit all the stories. I thought this is a fantastic opportunity, and I'll greenlit, and that way something is happening that I can reap after the Meta project ends, and it won't look like I spent a year away.
Well, and I mean, honestly, too, the novel industry, and this is just from me working with a different Lou, actually, who did a book into a tabletop game. Lou Agresta, he's like, I could not believe how different the novel industry is from the tabletop. Because he started more in the tabletop industry and then moved into novel. It's like, it's such a different monster when you're dealing with publishing houses and who makes your stuff. And he's like, you're answering to a different lord. You are putting this out on every platform, so that's obviously changed since the 90s. Now you're doing book, phone, Kindles, everything under the sun, and this is the stuff going on. Didn't work? All right, I'll fix it for you. Thank you. There's a lot of stuff going on in just this Kickstarter, but more than that, how many short stories are in here?
So there's 10 stories, and it'll come out as an ebook and what's called a trade hardcover, which is just a regular standard hardcover. And then I'm going to do a deluxe gamer edition, which will be sized like the RPG books. We'll have the same layout. We'll have full color.
Sure.
Ksenia Kozhevnikova is doing a chapter opening, half-page chapter opening for every story, and there's a lot of additional art in it too. Most of it original to the book, some of it from the other books. And that will have a 5e appendix of monsters and magic items and spells and things, so you can take elements from the book and take them back into the game.
That was going to be my ask question. What's the crossover?
But the trade book is done. This is the proof copy.
Nice.
Done. So that thing.
I saw you post it on Twitter. I was like, is that an actual one or just a slip cover?
No. So it's just book.
Ooh.
And
now, is this also a kid's book again, or is this back?
No, God no.
Okay.
This is adult fantasy fiction. So
okay. You came back to us.
Yeah, but it's and again it's Will O'Brien on that gorgeous cover.
Yeah, it's super pretty. I'll scroll up to it. I mean, that's the cut from it.
Well, there's a thing on it is these are my players.
Aww.
And these are two of the iconics from the original role-playing book.
Oh, really?
And in that book, we had a tier where you got to be part of this thing called the Raven Guard, which are 9 elite warriors.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had 9 backers that became members of the Raven Guard, and that's them in the back.
Oh, that's super cool.
So a lot of Easter eggs for people who know on that. But the trade version will ship the minute the backer kit releases funds, the Kickstarter releases funds, that'll ship.
So this
And
this
then,
has a bunch of stuff in it then for
Yep.
5e, and we're obviously on Kobold Press.
Yep.
You're gonna start doing for TOV. Obviously TOV is not done yet for everybody. Is this something that they're gonna see in the future in that window when everything gets completed? That's gonna be Tales of the Valiant as well?
So when before this Kickstarter started, my plan was to let this be the last 5th edition offering, and to move out of Norengard into some of the other locations.
Sure.
And use that as a perfect point to switch rule systems.
And what and what are you doing then for that? So like, are we seeing a new culture? Are we going to like the equivalent to like a Scottish? Like, what are we doing for this?
This is probably a March 2024 Kickstarter, probably.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm kicking off a new adventure path with an adventure called Crisis in Castlebriar.
Okay.
And Castlebriar is actually a Swiss-inspired location from my second novel.
Oh.
And it's going to involve an incursion from the Fey realm in this location.
Are we talking some dark Fey? Is that what we're getting here?
Oh yeah, and I'm not ready to show this one publicly yet, but
Okay.
Florian Stitz did the cover, and it's absolutely gorgeous. And he did a couple other pieces for the interior for me too.
Oh.
And if you, so again, like mixing the children and the adult, my youngest pitched novel is a standalone book called Once Upon a Unicorn. And
Okay.
Once Upon a Unicorn, there's an island called the Glistening Isles off the coast of the country of Ireland, which is the first country south of Norengard. And Ireland is my big Celtic land.
Okay.
And the conceit is that the druids are busy keeping the Fae out. And
Okay.
the Fae can come through and, at Samhain, or, the solstices, the equinoxes, other times. The world has one moon that has its own moon orbiting it. So sometimes when the moons line up right, the bigger Fae can come. The small Fae, like brownies and pixies, can pop back and forth all they want.
Little
Or
tiny
just
rips
sit-
in the
or-
veil.
Right. But the bigger or more powerful you are, then the harder it is to come through and the less time you can stay.
Sure.
But they have annexed a series of islands now called the Glistening Isles off the western coast of Ireland. And that's their beachhead into the world. And it has been transformed into a piece of the Fey world, which is in my world called Elsewhere.
Okay.
And so there are 2 courts there, and it's roughly the Seelie and Unseelie court, but it's the Court of Flowers and the Court of Thistles. And the book Once
Court
Upon
of
a
Thistles?
Unicorn,
That's not
yeah.
good.
But the Once Upon a Unicorn dealt with the Court of Flowers, who aren't good either.
Nope.
But they're not. But they're not. They're ostensibly the good guys.
Yeah.
And I wrote that book so that an 8-year-old could read it and not be scared.
Sure.
But an adult who knew anything about Celtic mythology could read it and go,
Oh.
it stars unicorns obviously and nightmares, and what the horses don't see. You meet the only human in the book, a guy named Poor Man Tom.
Mm-hmm.
And he used to be he was abducted by the good fairy queen, and then she got tired of him, and now he operates a riverboat, and he sees the queen, and she's like, "Come back," and he's like, "I don't want to come back," and she's like, "Didn't I always put you back together when I took you apart?"
That's so.
and so I feel like a human could, the unicorns think this is a wonderful place to be. A human could come there and have a completely
different experience. Yeah.
So it's the Court of Thistles from that novel that are going to break through into the Swiss country of the Swiss city of Castlebriar, the Swiss-inspired city of Castlebriar.
Gotcha.
In next year's adventure. So that's what I was gearing up for, and I wasn't planning on moving ahead with that when Kobold dropped the bombshell in my lap and said, "How do you want to be one of the partner packs?"
Look, we had to do something with you. 1, 2. With the OGL stuff, we knew we had to put our stuff out. So it was like, all right, who do we trust to do some awesome stuff out of the gate? So with that, I'll pull up the webpage and we'll talk a little bit about what we're going to be doing with you and our lovely partner adventures. So obviously Throne and Bones is your baby. This is your set piece, the things you write in. And we have our partner adventure pack that's coming out. And you have one coming out for that. Without obviously ruining the plot behind it, can you tell us what people are in store for this adventure?
Yep. So the thinking behind that is I'm going to change my look and feel for the new adventures when I leave the Norse setting. And I'm not ready to commit to what that's going to be. So I thought it'd be easier to do this thing for Kobold Press in the Norse setting.
Sure.
And use the trade dress I've established and all that. But I want to tease the new stuff. So it's an adventure that takes place on the border of Norengard and Ireland.
Okay.
And you have some monsters, you have some fey creatures from Ireland who are coming through into Norengard. And without spoiling the adventure, if you play it right, this is the reason that the next storyline doesn't spill into Norengard. In other words,
so they're playing the
is,
precursor for what's going on.
Norengard is shielded from what's coming for the rest of the countries down south.
Sure.
And that shield has a hole in it right now, and some things are popping through. But if you can knock them back, then you're the reason Norengard is not in the next year's adventure.
What are these monsters that are on the cover of this?
Oh, those are Thistlekin.
What?
And I'm making them up. I will be making them up. I was waiting for the monster template to solidify from TOV. And
I mean, the preview's out. It's pretty close.
Yeah, I know. But
well,
they were
what are they
before they were
non-mechanically? What are they story-wise?
They are little goblin creatures that are plant-based, coming from the Court of Thistles in Elswither and the Glistening Isles.
Okay.
And then the elfin individual with the horns is I should have looked up the pronunciation.
Welcome to my life.
Yeah, it's Celtic. He's a fae called it's like a ganache or something, but I'm sure that's not how it's pronounced.
Someone in chat might know.
It's probably pronounced like Mario Sue or something, and it's a highly seductive male fairy that can charm people.
Oh, okay.
And it's from Celtic mythology, and I'm gonna come up with a few others. I'm thinking about I'm thinking about coming up with a couple more, either invented or drawn from mythology. But,
someone in chat said, I think he's called Master or Lord. Let's not overthink it.
but it's now I'm thrown. So it's basically my Scandinavian people with their first encounter with something outside of their world. They're used to trolls and Draugr and frost giants and Vathor, and they're like, what the heck is this? What are these things? How do you deal with them?
Yeah, so you're writing, I mean, for a new system, I shouldn't say, you're writing for a 5e parallel. It is new. Right. There's a lot of new stuff in it. You have your own races, there's some own classes, your own archetypes. Do you do a lot of the mechanics work, or do you get people like Suskind and Sarah Madsen do mechanics? How does that work for you in your process?
No, I'm doing a lot of the mechanics.
Are you really? Nice.
And I'm fast. I love the heritage and lineages. I haven't sat down with
make anything you want.
But again, it fits with what I was already doing, because when we were doing the first children's novel, the audiobook producer called me up and asked me a bunch of questions to before we did the audiobooks, and she asked things I never thought about. And one of the questions was, do your monsters all sound the same? Like, do they come from the other world, and so they should be one accent that we designate as monster accent,
right?
Or do they speak in the regional dialects,
like a dialect, yeah.
And I'm the guy that hates it when like mummies and lizard folk show up in the same dungeon. My monsters are regional, right? But my mummies are regional.
Sure.
You get ogres in Escarrain, which is French country. You get trolls in Norengard. They don't mix.
Yep.
And so the monsters speak in the accent they're from.
Yeah, it makes sense.
And also, there was a dwarven diaspora in the setting, and most of the dwarves went south, and the ones that stayed just live above ground with people.
So you get dialect differences when they're like on the border of maybe another country. You get ones that are so different than our world.
They're not speaking Dwarven; they're speaking Noranian. And they live along. So the idea of heritage and lineage is so much more in line with what I was already doing, because you just have a Dwarven lineage with a Noranian heritage.
Well, I think it's holdovers. It's holdovers from Lord of the Rings, and us thinking that's how we should write our stuff. But really, I think the more evolved we have become in the tabletop industry, you're like, maybe it's not that actually. Maybe that's far old concept. Let's make something new. And more people have pushed towards the idea of like a lineage and what your culture does and what your background actually should do. So I could definitely see in a setting that is based around our world, at least historically conceptualized, you probably want to use a dialect instead of Dwarven language.
Right. And I'm really looking forward to building out heritage and lineages based on the regions.
Yeah, and
do it not clean. Country by country, but at least like larger areas.
Yeah, you gotta fall into the like, how many do I want to make?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's huge.
I'm hoping to have the Naranian ones up for the as part of the Banner of the Bull.
For the adventure. That'd be awesome. Yeah.
I want to have an appendix.
Yeah.
They said keep it between like 16 and 32 pages. I'm already thinking it's going to hit 60.
It's hard when you're putting in as much art as you do, and you already have so much history behind what you're doing. It's very easy to be like, oh, I've had this from X years ago. Let's just plug it in. And you get to pull from real world history. I've always loved altered history set pieces where like they're fantasy, but they're a derivative of stuff that you can research. There's something nice about that.
I find when plotting out other fantasy world cultures, it's cool to take the actual history of an analogous place, maybe two analogous places, and stick them together,
smash them,
so that you don't have a country suffer from a massive invasion and then raise a huge army the next year. Just the broad strokes, rhythms of the ups and downs, when there was a famine, when there was a plague, when there was a war, so that when you come up with your own, and maybe it wasn't the King of France, maybe it was a dragon.
Sure.
But then the rhythm is there. And
without hardships and drama, you don't have a story.
Right. But it's not. But you don't stick them next to each other. You make sure that you don't do something impossible.
Right. Yeah. No.
You make sure that you've given the culture sufficient time to bounce
to
back
rebuild,
from whatever.
Yes.
Yeah. And so by plugging in the real word things and then shaving off the serial numbers and then remixing it and adding in the fantasy, you ensure that your own invented history has a natural rhythm.
Magic can only fix so many problems. So, in speaking of magic, in this, you're writing a very different set piece in a world that doesn't have magic. How do you handle what we would know as like clergy, shamans, witches, wizards? I know Norse mythology from working on some stuff, but how are you handling that as a whole for Throne and Bones? Like, what is magic in your set piece?
So magic, it's interesting because in the novel, magic is really the province of the monsters and other people. As I got into the game and using 5e rules, that was not the case. And so, the thing I'm the most proud of and that gave me the most trouble is there's a class of person in Scandinavia called a vulva.
Okay.
And the vulva, the volur plural, were traveling seers.
Yeah.
And they were women predominantly, although men could be vulva, and if a man becomes a vulva, they dress as a woman to be a vulva. And
that's a tough one to try to rewrite for tabletop.
And no, I didn't rewrite it at all. The
Kept
Norse
it?
is full of cross-dressing. Yeah,
it is.
So in the guide it says it is women or women presenting.
That's awesome.
And but I thought they carry the staff of the vulva, and it's a magic staff, and I thought they're wizards. They carry a staff, right?
Yeah.
And so for the longest time I was trying to force that into being a subclass of wizard, and then finally I got over myself and took a step back and looked at what they actually do. They told the future. They shapeshifted into animals. They control the weather. And I'm like, oh my God, it's druids. They're druids. They're druids. And I wasn't thinking druid because I've got druids in Ireland south of me.
Just different kind, man.
And it's a different kind, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, I didn't want to use druids. And I'm like, but they are druids. They were druids.
100%. I have druids that count the rings of a tree to tell fortunes. So.
Yep. And then there's another the hidden folk, the Huldra. Huldra are, depending on where you read, they have cows or foxtails, and they have the hole in their back that looks like the cavity in a rotten tree.
Yep.
And they like to live among people, but if you call them out, they'll get mad and they'll disappear. And so in one of the cities, there's a Huldra that runs a mead hall, and everybody loves her mead, and her tail is always falling out. and everyone pretends not to see it because
they don't want her to leave.
Oh God, no! And take the best beer in the world with her, And so, like, a new person comes in and sees it, and everyone tackles him before he can say anything because, God forbid, you offend her and she leaves.
Yeah, you don't want that. You don't want to lose beer. Trust me.
But the Huldra, you don't ever know what percentage of the Neranian population is actually Huldra.
Huh.
And
that's actually cool.
So they're there, but in running my own games and also hearing from playtesting and people running their games, Huldra Volva is the favorite combination.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, that's gonna be easy for you to do with TOV.
Yeah.
It's gonna be super easy to do. Yep. I'm excited to see you build out some new mechanics and that stuff that Kobold Press is. I know you have worked with Kobold Press for a while, but seeing that what we're making is kind of, we found the line, like we're finding a way to work with people around us to give them the things they want without shaving 5e away so much that the old stuff doesn't function anymore. But the most important question I have here as we're getting to the end, you got a Kickstarter going on. It's novel, short stories, and 5e content, kind of the last foray for 5e in that Kickstarter, right?
Yeah, well, the Kickstarter's not novel. Kickstarter's just short story anthology.
Short story, and
then there'll be a version of it that is sized like a role playing.
It says a game PDF or something like that on
it's a deluxe gamer edition.
Yeah, that's what it is. Deluxe gamer edition.
You can either get the black and white regular book version, or you could get one that will be sized like, it'll look like, I think you have a picture of it.
Yep, I'm pulling it up right now.
It'll have the appendices with extra monsters and things like that.
Gotcha.
And so it'll have all 10 short stories laid out on the the scroll type pages.
Yeah, so here on it I have it pulled up. It's the Deluxe Gamer Edition PDF for $15, and it comes with the Deluxe Gamer Edition PDF. What else is there? Stretch goals, and then also previews and updates. So it looks like everybody gets the previews and updates. That's nice.
Yep.
You're usually locked behind a door. So you have that stuff that's coming out. You're doing an adventure for Tales of the Valiant, which is going on right now. But the most important question I have is none of that. Where did you get your Transmet glasses?
I got those from DC Direct back in the day, man.
Look, Spider Jerusalem is by far one of the best journalists in history. Yes, he's Gonzo, but he's one of the best journalists in comic history. Why? Do you have a fascination with Transmet? Was it just the glasses? Like, where does that come from?
I was a journalist when Transmet came out, and I was bald. They used to call Paramount and say, Lou wants to come down to the set, and Lita Faccio, the script coordinator, would go, Lou, bald Lou? Send him down. I was Lou, bald Lou. And
you need a little spider
if I'd known you were going to go off on it, I have the statues about this tall of Spider on the toilet with the three-headed cat.
Yep, with the cat.
Yeah. I love that, and I used to have one of the panels from the artist on.
Oh, really?
Too.
Yeah. So, I mean, it
one
was such a wild
where it says, "I'll shoot you with the bowel disruptor." My head bones. I have many head bones.
Yep.
I have that panel.
Lucky.
Yeah.
I mean, it's such an amazing comic, and I figured it had something to do with the journalism stuff. You're like, oh. Yep. It's kind of like, I have to read this. He's bald. He's such a great character. He's not, warning everybody, he's not a good guy.
At all. Yeah. He's Hunter Thompson. He's based on Hunter Thompson.
Yeah, I was just going to say, he's kind of a bad individual, but the comic is amazing. I just had to ask, because you're doing all this tabletop stuff, and I saw those glasses, like, I know those glasses anywhere. Those things are, like, prized possessions for people nowadays, because you can't get them anymore. You can order them on eBay, maybe find someone who's 3D printed, but like the original versions you can't get anymore. I remember in Wizard World, you could order those glasses out of an ad in Wizard World. That's ages ago. But I had to ask what it was, if it was like a special spot for you in writing, or if it's something you worked on it maybe at some point in time. I
just identified with him.
It deserves a TV series. I still wholeheartedly believe that. I don't know how well it would do now, but man, it would be great. But
Patrick Stewart was attached at one point.
I know.
Long time ago.
Can you imagine an old Spider Jerusalem and he's playing it now?
But he wanted to play it back in the late 90s.
Yeah, it was a crazy, wild piece. So you've been around the block for a while. You've put out a lot of amazing stuff. Obviously, Kobold Press is super excited to have you on board doing something with Tales of the Valiant. So
Can I do some shout outs real
Yeah,
quick?
shout away, my friend.
I
Yeah,
wanna,
you know what? I'll even go better.
Thank...
I'll put you on solo cam.
No, don't do that.
No, I already did it. Too late. It's just you.
All right. I just want to shout out. I've been working with Heroic Maps as well as Rob Lazzaretti does all my city maps. Heroic Maps does our battle maps, and they've done, God, it's probably like 70 or 80 maps for me now. And every time I do an adventure, they put out a map pack, and they'll do things like if we just had like a longhouse at night, they'll put out a daytime version. They'll put out like a snowy version or something. So you'll get like 4 or 5 iterations of every one. And I've loved their maps for years, and I'm so honored that they work with me. And then Milestone Heroes, that makes 3D tabletop terrain, has been making terrain based on my maps. So
I didn't know that. That's awesome.
Yeah, right now they're not branded Thrones and Bones. They're just Milestone Heroes, but they have long houses and Viking streets and Viking borrow mounds, and they're gonna start gathering them up into packs so you can actually duplicate the maps you need for the adventures.
Oh, that's super cool.
There's a soundtrack called the Thrones and Bones RPG soundtrack from David Joseph Wesley, who's a Grammy-nominated composer out in Los Angeles in video games and TV. And he was a Star Wars fan, read my Star Wars novel, called me up, said, let me make some music for you. So he made a 10-song soundtrack that's an accompaniment to the game. And I'm going to forget somebody.
It's like the Namis. You gotta...
each of the original children's books contains a board game. And Thrones and Bones is itself a board game based on the Viking game of Hnefatafl.
Oh.
And there's a lot of different rules for Hnefatafl, so I created my own rules for Thrones and Bones. So the back of the first novel and in the campaign setting book, you have the rules for Thrones and Bones. And
I didn't know that.
And so there's also a 3D Thrones and Bones set you can buy and print out and play.
Oh, really? Like 3D model prints?
Yeah.
That's super cool. Well, you have to give me those links so that I can put them in. Is there anyone else you want to shout out? Feel free. I mean, the floor is yours.
I'm sure there is.
I know you listed like Brian Suskind, Sarah Madsen.
It's not available, but we just gave it off with the first Kickstarter. It hasn't come back yet. But John Popson of Effin' Cool made me a model of my heroine, Theana Frostborn, and that was an SDL file that was given out with the first Kickstarter. And Mike Sheridan, another 3D designer, Mike Sheridan and Andrew Mills together. Andrew's the guy from Milestone Heroes, but Mike and Andrew together made the board game 3D printable.
That's awesome.
Somebody's sitting there going like, "Why haven't you mentioned me yet, you asshole?" And I'm like, "I don't know. I can't remember who you are right now, but I love you. I'm sure."
Oh man. Well, look, this industry is full of connections. Like, I know earlier in this interview in chat, you talked about how, and I got lucky. It's not luck. It's sweat equity and working long hours at Doctor Who conventions to land the next job, to work long hours, to land the next job. And eventually you just build this kind of like family behind you of people who you work with because you enjoy it. And I think the reason a lot of us are in this industry is because we love our hobby. We love the creative outlet, and we've met really cool people in it, and we're like, how do we make more awesome stuff with the people we like to be around? That's how most campaign settings are made, is because you played it with your friends. I don't care whose it is, from Midgard to Tullus, they were playing with friends. And it's cool to see you being able to put your own IP out for people to enjoy, read with their kids, and then even graduate into adult content with super kind of creepy horror versions of it, which is awesome, because that's my jam. So you have your new stuff coming out with us. The Kickstarter's going live right now. I will slap that in chat for you again. Lou, is there any parting words before I do our kind of YouTube closeout?
This has been wonderful. On these other things coming up, I'm going to do revised versions of the first 2 books that expand them with some of the content that's come up, especially some stuff I made for 5e that I won't be using since we're not going with 5e.
Imagine that.
Yep, and I may even convert the original system into some other things.
Yeah, I mean, converting things, the writing's there, mechanics, you just got to reformat. That's the hard part. It's the formatting the book to fit the new stat blocks and things like that. That's the work. Oh, yeah. Like a stat block for one, totally different.
That's it. I remember who I didn't shout out to.
Go.
My nephew Jonathan Anders is a linguist. Not by profession, but by training. And when we were at Meta, he created 2 conlangs for us, constructed langues.
Yeah, we're doing it for Draconic right now.
Jonathan is. That's Jonathan doing the Draconic language. And he wrote an epic poem style version of the story of the backstory for me that appears in this.
Oh,
And
really?
then for this, in the setting guide, I hid Beowulf in my setting guide. There's a city that has a mead hall, and I just mentioned in the setting book that the mead hall had a story called the Bear Sun's Tale associated with it. So for this, I asked him, how would you like to write the Bear Sun's Tale?
Oh,
And he did, and it's written in epic verse. It reads like Beowulf. And it's
are you
huge.
serious?
Oh yeah, and it's amazing, and it is like a saga, and it's not
cool.
It's the only poem in the thing, and it's a long one. It's like 20 pages or something, and it reads like my world's Beowulf. It's awesome.
So I guess our closing one, I'm taking one question from the audience because I just saw it and it's awesome. Throne and Bones, Space Viking supplement.
So, all right. Well, first I want to correct you, and I'm sorry, Eric. It's Thrones and Bones. And
I read theirs.
Yeah, I want to make sure that
Throne and Bones. I'm reading theirs. It says Thrones.
Google it right.
Yeah,
but
no,
it's
Throne. Singular, plural.
They're both plural. But so there's an unpublished novel that never got very far where they find a buried spaceship. And
there is one.
There is one. It's in a different country, but there is one. And I think that my light elves may have a spaceship. I haven't decided yet. But they're pretty far away. They're about 1,000 miles out of Norengard, but they may have a spaceship.
See, and there you go, Chill.
I want to get there. Yeah, and there are airships in the setting, although not in the north part. The faux Chinese country of Longo has a treasure fleet of flying ships because they got their hands on Cloudspar, which is the rock of Cloud Cities. Under the right circumstances, it effervesces and is lighter than air.
Let you fly.
And so they've put it in their treasure fleet, and they have these incubation machines called in English it's cloud incubation. I have it in Chinese, but don't ask me to pronounce it. It's like Fu Yu Quan, but it's cloud incubation machine.
Okay.
And that powers their treasure fleets, and they fly all over the world.
I'm sorry. What's a treasure fleet?
Oh, you don't know the Chinese treasure fleets? Oh my God.
No, not offhand.
During the Ming
Is that the thing that moved all the gold during the? Okay.
No. They built this enormous fleet of ships, and they sent them out all over the world. There's some indication they may have even gone to the Americas, and it was purely diplomatic. It was not conquest. They wanted to just meet people, exchange cultural ideas. It was fucking Starfleet. Sorry, it was Starfleet. It was Starfleet. It was a non-militaristic fleet that went out for cultural exchanges. And what happened was the eunuchs got jealous of the fleet commander's power, and then that lightning struck a wing of the palace, and the eunuch said, "That's it. The signs are there. You need to call back the treasure fleets." And the treasure fleets were recalled and all shut down. And China went xenophobic for the next couple hundred years.
Is that what Star Trek was based around?
I don't know, but it's totally that. And so I was thinking about the parallels with that in Star Trek, and so the ships need to fly. So
obviously
you actually meet someone from that fleet in the Sagas of Norengard Adventures.
Well, we're ending on that because that's too good to not end on.
Cool.
Are you? Is there somewhere they should follow you? Is Twitter the best for you? Is your website the best for you?
LouAnders.com is okay. I'm on Facebook at LouAnders. There's also Thrones and Bones on Facebook.
Mm-hmm.
I've got a Substack newsletter going.
Can they sign up for most of that on your website?
Yeah, and okay. If you go to Twitter and click the link tree, you can find everything.
You know what?
And I'm on Instagram. I'm on everywhere, and it's usually either Thrones and Bones or LouAnders. I'm very spreadable, if they still say spreadable.
You brand yourself and brand the one thing you're doing, and that's how you go. Well, that's excellent. It was awesome talking to you today. I'm looking forward to seeing what you do for TOV coming out in the future. Stay in the wings as I close us up here. We can chat afterwards for a few moments. For everybody else, thank you for joining us today. This has been awesome. Just a font of information on things, and now I know where Star Trek came from, which I Well, maybe it really didn't, but it sure sounds like it to me. I agree with you. His Kickstarter for him is live right now. I have put up the piece in chat again. The character sheet was asked about earlier. I wanted to drop that for everybody. And then for our guest, here are the 2 links right now for the Kickstarter and for their website. A novelist and an amazing creator, and the fact that they're doing stuff with us makes us super happy with Kobold Press. You'll find more of their stuff coming out soon, and of course, they're one of the people putting out the adventures under our partner stuff on our Kickstarter. So everybody, if you're watching this on YouTube later, down below in the comments, I'm gonna ask a very simple question. Do you know who Spider Jerusalem is? Because if you don't know who he is, you should look that up. Links down below for everything we talked about today. And if you are watching this later, over on this side, there's going to be a video to watch, probably another partner video. And then on this side is going to be the bell to click. Click the alerts so you can get all the updates that we have and that we put out on YouTube. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Thank you for all the rage. You are wonderful. And we'll see you next week for another Kobold Chats.